Winter had a way of swallowing sound on the far edge of Snowridge Valley, as if the world itself held its breath, waiting for something unnamed to happen. Snow lay thick over the land, a white quilt tucked tight around every fence post and forgotten trail. And inside that quiet, in a small cabin leaning gently toward the pines, lived Evelyn Hartwell, 25 years old, beautiful in that unspoken way grief sometimes softens a face, makes it honest, makes it breakable. She moved with a careful grace, the kind learned only by those who've had to teach themselves how to live again after life takes someone they loved. The morning began with frost painting the windows in delicate spirals. Evelyn traced one with her fingertip, watching her breath cloud against the cold glass. A year had passed since she buried her husband, but winters still felt heavier without his voice moving through the rooms. She stepped onto the porch, gathering her shawl close as the wind licked at her cheeks. The sky above was pale, nearly silver, carrying the quiet promise of another snowfall. Somewhere deep in the woods a crow cawed, breaking the stillness. Evelyn walked toward the tree line, boots sinking into fresh drifts, her basket swinging gently against her hip. She needed extra wood. Christmas was 2 days away, and though she had no guests to warm the home for, she still honored the ritual of lighting a generous fire. It made the silence feel less empty. As she knelt to gather fallen branches, she felt the familiar ache of being watched, not by danger, but by memory. She wondered if Winter remembered her husband too. A set of footsteps approached from behind. She startled, standing quickly, snow dusting her skirt. Caleb Rivers emerged between the pines, his breath puffing in pale clouds. He was handsome enough, charming enough, the kind of man who smiled too quickly and assumed the world wanted to smile back. He tipped his hat as if the snowflakes had been waiting for the gesture. "Didn't think you'd be out here alone in weather like this," he remarked, his tone half genuine, half patronizing. "Christmas isn't meant to be spent in an empty cabin, Evelyn. You ought to let people in again." She forced a polite smile, but something inside her tightened. Caleb had been circling her life for months, offering help she didn't need, pity she didn't ask for, and a future she couldn't feel. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if confiding in her. "Folks worry about you. A young widow with no company, no man to look after her. This land gets lonely." Evelyn lifted her chin. "I manage well enough." Caleb's expression flickered with impatience. "You could manage better," he said, eyes narrowing with unspoken expectation. Then, sensing her resistance, he sighed, touched her sleeve too casually, and turned back toward town. "I'll stop by tomorrow. Maybe you'll reconsider having someone around for Christmas." His footprints trailed away, swallowed gradually by snow. Evelyn exhaled, letting the quiet return. But the quiet didn't last long. From deeper in the forest, a presence stirred, a sensation more than a sound. The air shifted, thickened, as if the woods themselves leaned closer. Evelyn turned slowly, breath-catching. A giant figure stepped from the shadows. Tall, broad-shouldered, bare-chested despite the cold, skin the warm bronze of sun-touched stone. Long black hair stirred by the wind. A face carved with solemn strength. He carried an injured doe over one shoulder, as if it weighed nothing. Taza Lonetree. She knew the name whispered in town, sometimes with fear, sometimes with misunderstanding, rarely with truth. He was Apache, living beyond their mapped boundaries, moving with the forest rather than settling against it. She'd seen him only once before, from a distance. But now he stood close enough that she could see the snow melting instantly where it touched his skin. He paused a few steps away, lowering the doe to the ground with unexpected gentleness. Evelyn's heart thudded, her breath trembling, but not from fear. There was something quiet in his gaze, something steady. A man who didn't inspect her loneliness the way others did. A man who understood silence. He nodded once, respectful, eyes returning briefly to the woods as if gauging whether he should leave her undisturbed. Evelyn swallowed, unsure whether to speak. He beat her to it, his voice low and smooth as winter dusk. "You dropped this." He held out a small piece of pine she hadn't realized had slipped from her basket. His large hand dwarfed the branch. She stepped forward, fingers brushing his as she took it. The moment was fleeting but warm, a small defiance against the cold that ruled the valley. "Thank you," she whispered. Taza studied her with a depth that made her feel seen. Not assessed, not judged, simply known. His gaze flicked toward the direction Caleb had gone, then back to her, as if he'd heard the tension in their exchange even from afar. "Winter grows harsher tonight," he said quietly. "Take more wood than you think you need." Before she could answer, he lifted the dough again and moved away, steps silent despite his size. Evelyn watched him until the trees swallowed his shape, her breath catching in a way she hadn't expected. She felt strangely steady by his presence, and strangely aware of the emptiness Caleb had left behind. Back at the cabin, the sky dimmed into evening. Evelyn stacked wood near the hearth, listening to the wind hiss softly along the roof. She lit a lantern, the flame casting a trembling gold onto the table she always set for one. The empty seat across from her looked heavier in the fading light. As she turned down the wick, she noticed something at her door. A fresh bundle of firewood, neatly tied with strips of bark. She hadn't put it there. She stepped onto the porch, snowflakes swirling around her like drifting ash. Her gaze drifted toward the treeline. Two massive footprints led away into the dark woods, and vanished where the shadows began. Evelyn stood there, heart beating in a new rhythm, one she didn't yet understand. Winter, it seemed, was keeping more secrets than she thought. Snow fell in thin, weightless strands the next morning, drifting from a sky the color of washed linen. The world outside Evelyn Hartwell's cabin seemed hushed, as if the valley itself remembered the quiet exchange beneath the pines, and did not wish to disturb it. She moved through her home like a woman carrying both warmth and ache, arranging blankets, sweeping stray ash from the hearth, lighting the stove though the day had barely begun. She wasn't preparing for guests, she told herself. She was simply tending to the rituals that made winter feel less hollow. Still, when her hand passed by the table, she paused, fingers resting on the smooth wood. It was too early to set dinner. Too early, yet her mind drifted not to the meal, but to the memory of a pine branch pressed lightly into her palm by a man with a voice like winter dusk. Evelyn shook her head, chiding herself. Wishes had no place in a widow's life. She set a single plate out of habit, placing it where she always did, directly beneath the lantern's golden reach. A table set for one. A table that had stayed that way since the night her world changed. She stared at the empty chair opposite her, its silence louder than any storm. Yet today, the emptiness felt different somehow. Less heavy. More aware. By midday, the snowfall thickened, layering the landscape in a soft white hush. Evelyn wrapped herself in a wool shawl, and stepped outside to gather pine branches for Christmas Eve. The air bit at her cheeks, but the act of walking kept the cold from sinking too deeply. She followed a narrow path toward the woods, the same path where yesterday a giant had stepped out of winter, and placed a fallen branch into her hand like a small truth. The forest welcomed her with a muted stillness. Pine needles bowed under fresh snow, their weight bending toward the earth. A faint scent of resin drifted in the air. Evelyn bent to collect a cluster of fallen boughs, arranging them gently in her basket. As she straightened, she felt it, the soft, unmistakable sensation of being watched. But this was no danger. It was a familiarity blooming quietly inside her chest. Taza Lone Tree emerged from between the pines as though carved from the forest itself. Bare-chested again despite the cold, though snowflakes seemed to melt before clinging to him. His breath rose in slow clouds. His eyes held that steady, unreadable gentleness she had not known she needed. "You walk with caution today," he said in a low murmur, his voice sowing warmth through the cold. Evelyn brushed snow from her sleeves. "The woods feel different," she replied. "Not dangerous. Just aware." Taza nodded as if the forest's awareness were a language he understood better than any spoken word. He stepped closer, but not so close as to disturb her comfort. His presence alone felt like a shelter. She found herself drawing in a long, steady breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Caleb Rivers said I shouldn't walk alone," Evelyn added quietly, not intending to speak his name, but unable to hold the memory back. "He thinks winter is too much for me." Taza's gaze shifted, darkened slightly, though not with anger, just a quiet disapproval. "You carry your own fire," he said. "You don't need another's shadow to survive the cold." His words warmed her in places she'd thought beyond reach. She didn't know how to answer. Instead, she lifted her basket to show her collection of pine branches. "I'm preparing for Christmas. It feels wrong not to honor it." Taza studied the branches with mild curiosity, then her face with something like cautious admiration. "You keep traditions alive even when the heart is tired. That is strength." Strength. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her without pity, without telling her what she lacked. Here in the woods beneath falling snow, she felt seen in a way she had forgotten was possible. They began walking back toward her cabin together, the snow creaking softly beneath their boots. They didn't speak much, words felt too fragile for the quiet intimacy threading between them. Yet every step carried a comfortable rhythm. A companionship neither had declared but both felt growing. As they neared the valley's edge, a voice split the quiet. "Evelyn!" Caleb emerged from the direction of the road, boots kicking up frost in hurried steps. His expression tightened when he saw Taza beside her. He approached quickly, fake concern stretching across his face. "I've been looking for you. Thought you might need help gathering wood." Evelyn stiffened. "I'm fine, Caleb. I wasn't far from home." Caleb's eyes flicked to Taza, narrowing with a blend of jealousy and fear. "You shouldn't be wandering with—" He hesitated, searching for a word he could use without exposing his prejudice. "With strangers." Taza remained still, unbothered. A quiet strength radiated from him, calm as carved stone. Evelyn felt an unexpected anger rise, one sharper than anything she'd felt since losing her husband. "Taza isn't a stranger," she said gently but firmly. "And I asked for no one's help today." Caleb's jaw clenched. He looked between them with a heat that had nothing to do with weather. "You don't understand, Evelyn. Men like him—" "Stop," she cut in, her voice steadier than she expected. "His kindness is not yours to judge." Caleb froze at the quiet power in her words. Something shifted in his expression. Not understanding, not acceptance, but resentment curdled into silence. He muttered something under his breath and left without another word, his footsteps cracking hard into the snow until they vanished down the road. Evelyn watched him go, her breath trembling. For the first time, she had drawn a line for herself. And she had done it without apology. When she turned back, Taza was studying her with a softness she couldn't decipher. Not admiration. Not surprise. Something deeper. Respect. "You speak with courage," he said quietly. "I didn't feel brave," she admitted. "I just felt tired of being explained." Taza nodded, understanding etched in every gentle line of his face. "Grief teaches silence," he said. "But it also teaches when silence must end." His words brushed against her heart like a hand she hadn't realized she needed. They walked the rest of the way without speaking. When her cabin appeared between the drifts, Evelyn felt a familiar pang. The achy tug of loneliness that clung to the wood, the windows, the rooms she filled with quiet. She stepped inside and placed her basket on the table. The single plate sat there, solitary in its pool of lantern light. And for a moment, a brief, nearly imperceptible moment, she imagined a second one beside it. A plate that belonged not to memory, but to possibility. She quickly pushed the thought aside. Wishes were dangerous things. Yet that evening when she lit her lantern and started preparing a modest supper, her hand, not guided by thought, not guided by reason, reached into the cupboard and set out another plate. A quiet second setting, placed across from her own. She stared at it, breath thin, heart wandering toward a place she wasn't sure she should follow. The cabin felt strangely full, as though the warmth from the fire had grown larger, deeper, reaching toward that empty seat. And then, just as she stepped forward to remove the unnecessary plate, a shadow drifted past her window. Tall, broad, familiar. A silhouette framed by falling snow. Her breath caught. The fire crackled behind her. The second plate remained on the table, untouched. And outside, someone waited in the winter dark. The storm arrived without ceremony, rolling in from the northern ridge like a slow-moving wall of breathless gray. By nightfall, the wind had begun to howl against Evelyn Hartwell's cabin, rattling the shutters, slipping thin fingers of cold through every gap it could find. The valley, so still earlier that day, now trembled beneath winter's full weight. Inside, Evelyn moved quickly, feeding wood to the fire, tightening blankets over the windows, making sure the lantern had enough oil to last until morning. But the flame flickered strangely, struggling as though its courage were thinning. When she bent near the hearth to adjust the logs, a cough scraped up her throat. Then another. Smoke curled from the chimney opening above the fire, drifting into the room in lazy, suffocating ribbons. Her breath caught in her chest. The chimney was clogging, collapsing under the snow. She tried opening the front door for air, but the wind shoved back violently, filling the cabin with a colder kind of panic. She stumbled outside, coughing, eyes stinging from smoke and wind. Snow whipped into her face, blinding her, forcing her to brace herself against the porch railing. The world felt like a spinning veil of white. Then, through the storm's roar, came a deeper sound. Heavy footfalls, steady and unhurried, moving with the confidence of someone unbothered by chaos. A silhouette broke through the blizzard, tall and broad and unmistakable. Taza Lonetree stepped toward her, as if he had been waiting for the storm itself to reveal his path. Snow gathered thick across his hair and shoulders, but his movements were calm, effortless. The sight of him steadied something wild inside her chest. He reached her in 3 strides. "Evelyn," he said softly, though the storm tried to steal his voice. His hand closed around her arm, warm, grounding. "You should not be breathing this air. Come." Before she could protest, he lifted her as though she weighed no more than a sleeping child. Her arms instinctively curled around his neck as he carried her off the porch, away from the worst of the smoke. She tried to speak, but her breath came in thin, trembling threads. He held her against his chest until the coughing subsided, until she could breathe without pain. Snow swirled around them, clinging to his skin like a shivering halo. "Your chimney is blocked," he said after a moment. The words were calm, not accusatory. He set her gently onto her feet beside the barn wall, shielding her from the wind with the breadth of his body. "Stay here." Before she could answer, he turned and strode back toward the cabin, disappearing into the white rush. Evelyn pressed her back to the cold wood and listened. First to the storm, then to the muted thud as Taza climbed onto her roof. She could see nothing, but she heard the scrape of snow being cleared, heard the dull clink of stone shifting as he freed the chimney opening. The storm hissed like a living creature resisting him, but he moved with the surety of someone who had weathered far worse. Minutes later, the smoke spilling from her door thinned, then vanished entirely. The fire inside found its breath again. And through the blizzard, Evelyn watched the giant shape descend from the roof, slow, careful, ensuring nothing broke beneath his strength. When he reached her, snow dusted his hair like scattered silver. "It is safe now," he murmured. His voice was steady enough to quiet the storm inside her. She followed him into the cabin, warmth rushing over her skin. The fire burned strong again, crackling gratefully. She closed the door behind them and leaned against it, breath trembling with exhaustion and something else, something rising between fear and awe. Taza knelt near the hearth to adjust the logs, his broad back lit by firelight, the glow revealing the powerful curve of his shoulders. His presence filled the room as surely as the warmth did. Evelyn watched him with a heart that had begun to thaw without her permission. When he stood and turned to her, the fire cast a soft halo around him, making the storm outside seem like a distant dream. "You did not have to come," she whispered. The words felt fragile, almost foolish. But they trembled with sincerity. Taza studied her, his gaze steady, unflinching. "I felt the wind change," he replied softly. "And I knew it carried danger to your door." Something inside her unlatched. She stepped closer, small movements echoing loudly in the quiet room. "No one has watched over me like that," she confessed, surprising herself. "Not since my husband." Taza's expression shifted with something gentle, something like respect for the grief that still lived inside her. "Loss leaves shadows," he said. "But shadows also show where the light once lived." His voice held no pity, only understanding. And somehow, that was enough to unravel the guard she'd clung to since the day the world had taken too much from her. Evelyn sank onto the rug near the fire, pulling her shawl closer. Taza sat beside her, though he kept a small, respectful distance. The firelight danced across their faces, painting warmth where winter had carved emptiness. She found herself speaking, slowly at first, Then with more ease, she told him about the loneliness that settled around her like snow, the pressure from Caleb, the expectations she never asked to carry. Taza listened with a patience that felt sacred, his dark eyes never wandering, never interrupting. When she fell silent, he finally spoke. "You are not unseen, Evelyn Hartwell. The world may forget your heart's strength, but I do not." Her breath hitched. She looked away, unable to meet the weight of his sincerity. The fire snapped softly, warming her hands, warming places she thought winter had claimed forever. She felt Taza's shift beside her, a subtle movement that didn't break the quiet. "You are brave to speak of sorrow," he continued. "Brave to survive the winter inside you." No one had ever told her she was brave. Not once. Yet here he was, saying it without hesitation, without searching for reward, without trying to claim anything from her. A soft knock cut through the silence. Evelyn tensed instinctively. Taza rose in one fluid motion, standing between her and the door. But the knock came again, lighter, hesitant, carrying a familiar rhythm she'd grown weary of. Caleb's voice seeped through the doorframe. "Evelyn? Are you all right? I saw smoke. I came to check." Evelyn's heart sank, not from fear but from the sudden contrast of warmth and intrusion. Taza looked back at her, not asking permission, only offering the comfort of his steady presence. Evelyn stood slowly. She walked toward the door, pulse thrumming with a courage she didn't realize the storm had stirred into being. She placed her hand on the latch but didn't open it. "I'm safe, Caleb," she said. Her voice held a quiet firmness he had never heard from her. There was a pause. Disbelief. Perhaps disappointment. "Well, I suppose if you're sure," he muttered. "The storm's dangerous. I just thought, never mind." His footsteps retreated. The wind swallowed them. Evelyn exhaled shakily and turned back toward Taza. The firelight framed him in a glow that felt almost unreal, like a memory she hadn't lived yet but longed for. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something warmer, something fragile, something powerful, had begun to take its first breath. And neither of them could pretend otherwise anymore. Christmas morning arrived in a hush so complete it felt as though the entire valley held its breath. Snow lay deep and unmarred outside Evelyn Hartwell's cabin, a soft white quilt without a single footprint to disturb its innocence. The storm had passed overnight, leaving a stillness that pressed gently against the windows, asking to be noticed. Evelyn awoke wrapped in the lingering warmth of embers and the memory of a night where courage, quiet, tender, had filled her home like a new kind of fire. She rose slowly, her fingers brushing the blanket Taza had draped over her before he'd left just before dawn. She hadn't seen him go, but she had felt the shift in the room, as if the winter air had mourned the loss of heat in his absence. She stood near the window, watching the delicate shimmer of winter light settling across the valley. A part of her reached instinctively for hope, a dangerous thing, but one that no longer frightened her the way it once had. Today was Christmas. A day meant to honor warmth despite cold, faith despite sorrow. She drew a long breath and turned her gaze toward the table. The two plates still rested there from the night before, untouched, silently waiting for a future she wasn't yet brave enough to imagine. Yet as she approached them, the air in the cabin shifted, settling around her shoulders with a softness that whispered possibility. She lit a lantern, its glow spilling across the tabletop like honey. For the first time since her husband's passing, she did not set the table out of habit or loneliness. She set it with intention. She arranged bread, roasted vegetables, and a simple stew stretched carefully from what she had. She placed pine branches in the center to honor the season. She arranged the second plate with care, smoothing the cloth napkin beside it until it looked like an invitation rather than an echo of longing. Her hands trembled, not with grief but with something gentler, something blooming. A table for two. Not memory this time. Possibility. Just before noon, a soft knock sounded at her door. Her heart tightened. Taza? No, the knock lacked his steadiness. When she opened the door, Caleb Rivers stood outside in a coat lined with fur, cheeks flushed from the cold, expression carefully arranged into concern. "Merry Christmas, Evelyn," he said with a forced smile. "I wanted to bring you something, just a small holiday offering." He held a basket filled with dried apples, preserves, and a small bottle of cider. "Thought you might appreciate company today," he added, his tone hopeful yet edged with expectation. Evelyn stepped aside politely, accepting the basket with gratitude. But her gaze drifted involuntarily toward the second plate on the table. Caleb noticed. His expression changed, tightening with something sharp beneath the surface. "Expecting someone?" he asked lightly, but the strain in his smile was impossible to miss. Evelyn breathed out, calm and unafraid. "I've prepared dinner for whoever wishes to join me today. It's Christmas. No one should eat alone." Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice in a way that felt rehearsed. "Then let me stay. After everything you've been through, you deserve a man who'll look after you. Someone from town, someone who understands your world." Before she could respond, he reached for her hand, too forward, too sure. Evelyn pulled back gently but firmly. "Caleb, your kindness is appreciated, but I don't wish to be looked after. Not by someone who sees loneliness before seeing strength." Caleb's eyes darkened. "This is about that Apache, isn't it? The one skulking around your cabin?" Her pulse quickened, not out of fear but out of the painful clarity in his words. She stepped back, shutting the door halfway between them. "Taza has shown nothing but respect. That is more than I can say at this moment." Caleb's jaw clenched, his breath fogging the air in harsh bursts. "You're making a mistake, Evelyn. Men like him." She stopped him quietly. "I won't hear it." The door clicked softly as she closed it. His footsteps retreated through the snow, fading into the valley's stillness. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cool wood, heart steady, grounded by the strength that had begun to take root inside her. She turned back toward the table, the second plate now glowing warmly in the lantern light. She sat at the edge of the chair, fingers tracing the rim of the dish. A deep silence filled the cabin, but it wasn't empty. It felt like waiting. Like breath before a confession. Like the moment between snowflakes falling and snow settling. Evening crept in gradually, blue shadows stretching across the floor. Evelyn lit the fire, its gentle crackle filling the space where loneliness once lived. She checked the stew, stirred it again though it didn't need stirring, adjusted the napkins though they were already straight. She felt foolish for hoping, and yet the hope remained. Then, as she reached for the ladle, a sound rose above the quiet. A heavy step upon the snow. A second. A quiet exhale of breath outside her door. Her heart fluttered like a candle flame. She walked toward the entrance on bare feet, drawn by instinct more than certainty. Before she touched the handle, she felt warmth radiate from the other side, familiar and steady, as if the winter cold dared not cling to him. She opened the door. Taza Lonetree stood beneath the falling dusk, shirtless despite the sting of winter, snow melting instantly upon his skin. His hair hung damp over his shoulders. Frost clung to the edges of his breath. In his hands he carried a small wrapped bundle of venison and winter herbs tied with strips of bark. His gaze met hers, deep and warm in the pale evening light. Evelyn felt her breath leave her, as though the world had exhaled through her. "For you," he said quietly. "A gift for your table." Her voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. "You didn't have to bring anything. I wanted to." His words held no hesitation, no expectation, only truth. She stepped aside, allowing him inside. The warmth of the cabin embraced him instantly, lantern light gliding across the powerful lines of his shoulders, the strength in his arms, the gentleness in his eyes. He took in the second plate, the pine centerpiece, the simmering stew. Something softened in his expression, something almost like wonder. "You made this to share," he said, voice low. Evelyn nodded, unable to look away from him. "I did." Taza set the bundle beside the centerpiece and stood quietly for a moment, as if memorizing the sight of a table set for two. Then he spoke, each word shaped with care. "Can I share this Christmas dinner table with you?" A warmth spread through her chest, fragile yet profound. "Please," she whispered. "Sit with me." They ate slowly, speaking in soft tones between spoonfuls of stew and the crackle of the fire. Their laughter, small and hesitant at first, wove itself into the woodwork, warming the cabin deeper than heat ever could. At times their hands brushed accidentally, and each time, something inside Evelyn sparked like embers catching breath. As the fire dwindled into a soft glow and dinner faded into quiet companionship, Evelyn felt a shift inside her, like a door opening inward. She looked at Taza, really looked, and saw not the giant the town whispered about, not the man who had saved her from the storm, but the soul who had brought warmth back into a heart she feared would never thaw again. Taza held her gaze, unflinching. The air between them thickened with a truth unspoken but rising like dawn over snow. And in the silence that followed, she sensed it clearly. He had not come for the meal. He had come for her. Night folded gently around the cabin, a dark velvet curtain stitched with distant stars. The last light of Christmas glowed in the hearth, soft and amber, painting the room in warmth that felt almost unreal. Evelyn Hartwell sat beside Taza Lonetree in the quiet after dinner, their breaths the only movement in the still air. The world outside lay buried beneath moonlit snow, untouched and waiting. Inside, something equally untouched waited between them. Tender, unclaimed, trembling at the edges. Evelyn rose to tidy the table, but her hands shook faintly, catching her off guard. Taza watched her with eyes that had memorized storms and silence alike. When she reached for a plate, he set his hand over hers. Not stopping, not demanding, simply offering steadiness. "You do not need to rush," he murmured. The warmth of his touch sent a ripple through her. She let the plate rest. The fire cracked behind them, sending a small burst of sparks upward like fireflies waking in slow motion. Evelyn drew a breath, one that felt deeper than any she had taken since becoming a widow. She turned to face him fully, her shawl slipping slightly from her shoulders. Taza stood slowly, towering yet gentle, his presence filling the cabin without crowding it. For a moment neither spoke. Their silence felt alive, like a path forming beneath their feet. "You came through a storm to save me," she whispered, her voice barely stronger than the glowing embers. "You've watched over me for days without asking anything in return." "Why?" His gaze softened. He stepped closer, leaving only a ribbon of air between them. "Because the wind carried your sorrow," he said quietly. "And something inside me answered it." Her breath hitched, a fragile sound. She looked into his eyes and saw no pity, no rescue, only recognition, as though he had found something of himself in her grief. "I never asked for anyone's protection," she murmured. "No. But your heart deserved it." Evelyn felt her throat tighten, the truth of those words unraveling a knot she had carried too long. She lifted her hands slightly, trembling with the question she had held back since the night the storm broke around them. "And what did my heart call you for tonight?" Taza inhaled slowly, as if preparing to give up a truth he had guarded fiercely. Then he stepped closer, close enough that the warmth from his skin brushed hers. His voice dropped into something deeper, shaped from years of solitude and strength. "I came because I could no longer stay away." Evelyn's lashes fluttered. Her pulse drummed softly against her ribs. Taza continued, his words low and unhurried, each one carrying the weight of a confession. "I have walked these woods for many winters, knowing only the sound of my own steps. Then I saw you, carrying firewood with hands that trembled from loss but refused to let go. You faced storms with no one standing beside you. And something inside me shifted toward you, like snow bending toward sunlight." His hand lifted but did not touch her, hovering as though waiting for permission. "You made the cold feel different, Evelyn Hartwell. You made it feel warm." Tears shimmered along her lashes, not from sorrow this time, but from the overwhelming gentleness in his voice. She stepped closer until her breath mingled with his. The fire lit the strong lines of his face, the softness in his eyes, the quiet yearning he had held behind silence. "I am afraid," she whispered. "So am I." Their honesty hung between them like a lantern suspended in still air. Evelyn reached up, her fingers brushing the side of his face, tracing the warmth of his skin. Taza closed his eyes at the touch, as though her fingertips carried something sacred. "I thought my heart had finished its stories," she murmured. Taza's eyes opened slowly, deep and steady. "Then let this be a new one." He lowered his forehead to hers, the gesture tender, reverent. His voice was barely breath when he spoke again. "Evelyn, I have fallen in love with you." The world stilled. The fire softened. The wind outside paused as if eavesdropping. Evelyn's heart surged forward, breaking through every wall she had built to survive the loneliness. She slipped her hands into his, fitting there as though made for it. A warmth bloomed inside her, slow and profound, like the first sunrise after a long winter. Taza searched her face, waiting. Not demanding, not expecting, just waiting with the quiet patience of a man who loved deeply. Evelyn lifted her chin slightly, her lips brushing his in a feather-like kiss that carried all the courage she had found through him. When she pulled back, her voice trembled with truth. "Then let this be my new beginning." Taza's breath shuddered softly. He drew her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that belied his strength. She rested against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, a rhythm that felt like safety, like return, like home. The fire dimmed to a gentle glow. The room faded into amber shadows. Evelyn did not move from his embrace, and he did not let go, both of them standing in the quiet fullness of a love neither had expected but both had needed. Outside, snow drifted slowly from the heavens, landing softly on the roof above them. And for the first time since her world had broken, Evelyn felt the future calling, not with fear, but with light.